My name is Lauren Zayu, and we're back for the second season of Unbossed, Unbothered, and Unfiltered, the show about what you say and how you say it. We'll be chronicling the first 100 days of the Biden-Harris administration on everything from immigration to HBCUs. So join me for a crash course on this country's politics, current events, and how we move forward. Hello and welcome to Unbossed, Unbothered, and Unfiltered. I'm your host, Lauren Zayu. Cannabis legalization has been happening across the country, but despite the war on drugs pillaging Black and Brown communities, it seems like dispensaries have been catering to the majority. This episode, I want to talk about what cannabis legalization looks like from the inside for those who are most impacted by the policies. Today, we are speaking with Cree Robinson, a Detroit-based tech entrepreneur and social justice advocate within the cannabis industry. A graduate of Spelman College, she co-founded Toucanna, a full-scale operations management software for dispensaries and cannabis lounges. She's passionate about social equity and ensuring that those harmed by the war on drugs achieve ownership within the industry. She is currently investing her time into building programs and supporting social equity applicants after they have been awarded licenses. I'm excited to welcome to Unbossed, Unbothered, and Unfiltered, Cree Robinson. Hi, Cree.
Hello. Hey, Lauren. Hey, lady. How's it going?
I'm good. I'm glad you could be here with us today. So we just kind of want to take it from the top. If you could tell us about you and like kind of how you ended up in this industry.
Yeah. So hey, everyone. I'm Cree Robinson. I am a tech co-founder in the cannabis industry. And so Lauren and I were just chatting about how I got here, which is the question that everyone wants to know, just because my background is a little bit unconventional. So I'm based out of Detroit, graduate. Lauren and I went to school together, graduates of Spelman College, and I graduated with a bachelor's in psychology, went on to get my PhD in clinical psychology, however, quickly realized that it was not for me. So I actually dropped out at my master's and then did some stuff in between, kind of just was figuring it out, and then transitioned into tech. So all of my work experience, at least 95% of it, is in tech. And then from there, I've always been an advocate for cannabis. I've been a consumer, even in the legacy market. My partner has also been a member of the legacy market. He was an entrepreneur in the legacy market, we'll say that. And it just made sense. Cannabis was legalized recreationally here in Michigan, which is where I'm based, in 2018. And we had already been working on another venture focused on training Detroit's workforce, transitioning them into tech. So when cannabis was legalized, it made sense for that to be our next venture. And here we are.
Very cool. And so keeping that in mind, you mentioned the legacy market. And I wanted to kind of talk about what are some of the hindrances between like being a member of the legacy market and then currently like taking advantage of the climate and I guess the legal space.
Yes, 100%. And just backing up a little bit. So I'm in the industry, so I forget that not everyone is familiar with the term. So when I say legacy market, I'm referring to the illegal market. Some folks refer to it as the black market. That's not PC anymore, but so just pre-legalization. And so, that is a conversation that I'm always in. So I'm on, if you're familiar with Clubhouse, it's the newest audio only apps. I'm always on there. There's a really huge cannabis community, cannabis presence on that app. So these are a lot of the conversations that have been had. And it's really difficult because there's this lag where we have the legacy market. We're mentioning the legacy market, but the folks from the legacy market, myself, I'm a part of the legacy market, right? Those folks, the market is not developing for those folks. The market is developing for the folks that have access to capital, for the folks that have the pull. And those are the folks that are benefiting from this market, from this industry. It takes a huge amount of capital to be a part of this industry, unfortunately. Like, I don't care how you look at it. And that is one of the biggest barriers, unfortunately, at the end of the day, to start a business in general, right? It takes capital, it's going to take funds, it's going to take investments. However, just to get started. So if we're talking about costs, so there's an application process. So let me back up again. If you want to open a cannabis business, a plant touching business is what we call them, and plant touching business, those are the businesses that deal directly with the plant. So your dispensaries, your cannabis farms, your processing plants, so on and so forth. So let's just take a dispensary, for instance. You have to apply, you have to get a license. In Michigan, the cost just to apply, just to get a license, can be anywhere from $40,000 to like $140,000. And Michigan is one of the states where the cost is lower. If you're looking at a state like California, it can be anywhere from $80,000 to $250K. If you're looking at a state like Nevada, I think Nevada is along the lines of Michigan. However, you have to have like, I think it's 250,000 in liquid assets in order to apply. So, I mean, I don't know about you, but it's not easy to just look around and find someone with that sort of capital sitting around with $250,000 in liquid assets. And so again, just to emphasize again, this is just to get a license. This is not to secure a building. This is not to hire staff. This is not operating costs. This is just to get started. And so the ROI, like the money that you're going to be making, you can make a ton of money, but you got to start by getting that capital. You got to build the infrastructure. There's just so much. There's so many barriers just to get started in this industry. And unfortunately, if you look at the wealth disparity, that disparity unfortunately impacts people of color. So then, like, there's not, if you consider all those factors, there's not a question as to why there aren't more Black and brown folks who are owners in this industry, you know? So it's just, yeah.
I mean, I heard it was expensive. I didn't realize we were talking tens of thousands of dollars. Out of curiosity, like, so is it I mean, I feel like I know America, so probably not, but is it like a permanent license? Is it something that has to be renewed? Like, what is that process?
Yep. So you have to renew your license, I believe, annually. And I'm not certain of the costs that are associated with renewal. However, that's a great point that you bring up, because so say you've invested, say you get your license, right? You've invested $300K total to get your license, your startup costs, what have you. If you miss that renewal date, for example, or if you have, because compliance is so strict in this industry, that is the number one most important thing. So say you have a violation for something that you might think is small. Say you're running a dispensary and you're supposed to dispose of the cannabis plant in a certain way. So you have a staff member and they dispose of it in a way that's incorrect and you get fined. Sometimes those compliance violations can be minor to you, but they can literally shut you down. So bringing it back home a little bit, say you invest your $300K, what seems like a small mistake can literally close down your entire business. Your license is gone. That's it. That's $300K down the drain. You have to start over. If you can even get another license, because now you're going to have that mark of a compliance violation on your record. So, yeah.
Wow, that is mind blowing to think about. And as we like transition into Hold Up, what I kind of wanted to talk about is the relationship between the state, I guess we'll call it the business owner, and the consumer, right? Yes. Because I'll take somewhere like DC, where marijuana is decriminalized, but you can't buy or sell it. Like that's kind of where they. Yeah. So if you're in the situation where you're mid-transaction, then like that can still be a legal issue for you. And so granted, people have gotten around that in various ways, but understanding that the state initially, if we're going to talk about like people who are incarcerated for drug crimes, like that's very high.
Yes.
And so the state makes money there.
Yes.
And then in spaces where it's legalized, most of the time, not all the time, they don't retroactively release the people who are there for drug charges. So they're making money in the prison system. They then turn around and tax cannabis at a higher rate than say like alcohol or other items. And so they make money there. And as we just previously discussed, these expensive fees to even get involved. And so the state ends up like raking over a lot of money kind of on all sides of this, which leaves the business owner and the consumer very much at the state's will.
Yes, 100%. And it's, you know, I think it was a couple weeks ago, there was an article that came out that said 94% of cannabis related arrests in New York were Black and brown folks in 2020. Now, just think about that for a second. And like you said, we're making money. The government is making money off of folks being in the prison system. But in 2020, this was not, 2015, 2014. This was last year, 94%. And there are initiatives, right? There are states that have initiatives like the New York. So they just signed, the governor Cuomo just signed off on the bill to legalize cannabis recreationally. Mm-hmm. And a part of that bill was to automatically expunge cannabis related charges. There might be more specifics there in terms of the degree, but I don't remember off the top of my head. And so there are initiatives being done. I forgot where I was going then. I forgot what my point was, honestly.
It's fine. So there are initiatives happening in an effort to expunge people who are in prison for these crimes.
Yes.
Is important because a lot of the war on drugs ended up targeting Black and brown communities. And based on, I mean, if 94% of the arrests are Black and brown people, we know that 94% is nowhere near the population of Black and brown people in New York. Exactly. And we also know that so it's still working, it's still happening. I know that a lot of places, I think the rhetoric of the war on drugs has fallen by the wayside a good bit. A lot of people don't use that same language, but it's clear that the police are still operating in that same capacity.
100%. And I think, social equity now is such a buzzword, and it concerns me because granted, there are initiatives that are being done, like this bill that Cuomo signed, like it includes automatic expungement. That's great. There's an initiative in California, I think it was San Diego, where it was like 36,000 folks. They identified those folks and are trying to get their records expunged as well. So that's great. However, like it's not enough. For one, I'm happy that it's happening, but one of the things that I'm not seeing is like, what's the process? Like, what's the timeline? Like this is not something that can just happen overnight, right? So what's the timeline? Like, what else are we doing to help those folks, for one? And, again, social equity is becoming such a buzzword, but it's like, are we really talking about the root of the problem? When we talk about the war on drugs, like we need to talk about the fact that this is disproportionately still impacting Black and brown folks, period. Like, it's great to have social equity on your website and, say you're doing all of these things, but like, what are we actually doing? Like, we still need to be having these conversations, as uncomfortable as they are.
Yeah. And I do think social equity is, as you're completely and totally right, it's a buzzword. And it became really popular last year, with the protests and
yes.
Justice and all this stuff. And it's interesting because, so, I mean, as a consumer of Twitter, buzzwords become really popular, and it's hard for the average person, I think, to catch up to their meaning, right? And I think that happens a lot on the corporate level with social equity as well, because it became this thing that it's like, okay, regardless as to whether or not we know what it is, we need to say we're doing it, and we need to say we're invested in it, right? Yes. And so it's like you take your 3 Black employees, throw their picture up on the website, have an ad committed to like social equity in your byline, and all of a sudden it's like boom, done. And so a lot of spaces, I think, have not grappled with what I'm going to call like not just the war on drugs, but the legacy of the war on drugs.
Yes, exactly.
So much of like what's left of our communities is still dealing with it, even if the actual policies themselves have been absolved, even if the what is it? Like even if the policies are absolved and the language falls by the wayside, like these communities are left racked with the effects of it. I'm thinking about it even in the sense of like COVID, like as we get these vaccines and move forward, have we dealt with like the fallout of it though? Like it's one thing to deal with the virus, but what are we doing for, people? Like we talk about the number, a lot of people who've passed, and that is, I believe last I heard, like 500,000 people have passed away in America alone, and that's awful. Complete and utter tragedy, and did not have to happen. There are also people dealing with permanent side effects. There is also the economic fallout. There's also, kids who are supposed to be learning at school right now as though the world wasn't falling apart around them for an entire year. And so America has really struggles with dealing with the impact of things. And so I say all of that to say, I'm sure in the cannabis industry, like getting things legalized is one thing, but this legacy y'all are left to deal with. Like, what does that look like?
Yeah. So the legacy of, are you referring to like the legacy of folks being left behind still, specifically?
Left behind, or just the war on drugs in general? Like if you're a part of a legacy market for that long, as a consumer or a producer, like what does it look like to even attempt to move forward?
And it's so tricky because there are subtle things that I think are still so much, like very much excluding folks from the legacy market. So like, for instance, like the terminology is changing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like there are these terms that you're not supposed to use in order to, and I say air quotes, I'm not trying to undermine the, the push. It makes sense. But they're like these terms that we're supposed to be using in order to remove the stigma from cannabis. So for example, like cannabis is the push. The word cannabis is a push that, we should use. And to no longer use words like weed, pot, words like that. And I was involved in a conversation a couple of weeks ago. And while I understand, like, we want to use cannabis, we want to use the scientific name for the plant. That removes some of the stigma, that gets us closer to this federal legalization. I totally understand that. However, when you have folks that have been in the legacy market for decades, and to some of those folks, it's weed. Yeah. So then when we're saying, well, you can't say words like that, it's wrong, like, don't use that. Like, to me, that feels very exclusive. Like you're taking a culture from folks that have been involved in this legacy market and you're deeming it as negative and as bad. So like, that's just another way that the legacy market is left behind, because it's easy for them to say, well, I don't belong here. I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing. I'm going to keep doing things illegally. Unfortunately, I'm going to keep running my business illegally because there's not a space for me here. And so I think, those are just subtleties. And a lot of these conversations are not happening from folks who I think want to be exclusive. I don't think these are folks that want to continue to keep Black and brown folks out of the market. I just think there's a lack of awareness sometimes of what these initiatives and what these conversations, how they are impacting the legacy market. So I think we just have to be aware of how we're having these conversations, aware of how we're educating folks and the approaches to some of those things.
Yeah, I definitely see you there. And I was also thinking as you were talking, like, if kind of similar to the conversation of the war on drugs, I wonder if you have a felony or a drug charge, what it would even look like to try to participate legally. Like, if I'm petitioning the state, like, we know that a prison record can keep you from so many things.
Yes.
And so if I have the pull ends up being, if I have a documented history of being in this industry, I'm actually barred from participating in it legally, because you don't allow the people who have been doing it in order to take part in doing it legally. And I think that it's one of those things that I agree it's a barrier for communities of color, and I don't know that it's I do think at the state level at times it can be intentional, but even for well-meaning allies in an effort to get involved, sometimes the push can become so narrow of it just needs to be legal, it just needs to be legal. You leave out people who won't be able to participate in that with you.
Exactly. And that's one of the things, and I don't know about the specifics of the participation. Like, I know there are a lot of grants and funds for folks that specifically have cannabis related charges to get grant money to, embark on their entrepreneurial venture. So there are some of those things, but on a state level, I don't know what the specifics are. But that's what when I mentioned earlier, all these expungement initiatives, that's some of the language that is missing, at least for me. And I'm not saying it's not there. It's just not central enough to where I'm like, okay, so this is, even though, my charges have been expunged, I can still, or those folks can still participate in the market. Those are some of the details and the processes that I think really need to be at the forefront, because again, I have a charge, okay, but so now I can't participate. Now I can't, earn the billions and billions of dollars that everyone is evaluating the industry to be. So yeah, that's another barrier.
Yeah. And I do think they are evaluating it at millions and billions of dollars, because I don't remember the exact number, but I feel like Colorado was first to legalize. And I think after the first year, kind of people saw how much money the state made on that. And so it became I think that kind of helped spaces realize how popular that it was. And that regulating is often makes things safer. So you mentioned cannabis being the scientific name for it. But what is, I guess, that mean, right? So what is, I guess, the difference between what I guess weed you would buy either in a dispensary or somewhere else, and then an actual cannabis leaf? What does that look like?
Between the legacy market and the legal market? That's a good question. So a lot of it is just how it's tracked in the legal market. It's just so closely tracked. And there are a couple of different state systems. The main one is something called metric, and I won't get into the details, but it's what we call a seed to sale tracking system. And essentially it tracks a plant from the time that it's a seed and placed into soil to the time that it ends up in a consumer's hands. So if something goes wrong or you want to find just whatever, you always know where that plant is, right? So that's just, an attempt to make it safer. There's specific standards, like I mentioned earlier, as to how you can dispose of flower. That does not exist in the legacy market.
Okay.
And so you just don't have those safeguards, unfortunately. And for some folks, honestly, that is preferred because there's still a lot of paranoia in the industry, right? Especially from folks in the legacy market. And this idea of I don't want the government knowing what I'm doing. I don't want the government to be tracking me. There are some people that are, when you go into dispensaries, some ask for your information, like your phone number, for example, because they might add you to a customer queue so that you wait in line and they know when you're up next to be serviced. And a lot of folks are just really when you ask for a phone number, they're like, what are you asking for? So there's just a lot more tracking that exists in the legal market that doesn't exist in legacy. And for some folks in the legacy, that's preferred. For the industry is not completely, and I'm don't mean to get on my soapbox here, but it's not as welcoming, I think, as it needs to be for the folks that it needs to be towards, if that makes sense. So the paranoia makes sense, in my opinion.
Yeah, I definitely could understand that. And I mean, I have a question that's escaping me now that I was going to ask you. But it really is a situation where you said welcoming, right? What is how, I guess, so what for you would welcoming look like, or how does that end up manifesting itself?
Yeah, I think, for one, I think so. One of the reasons why everyone is celebrating this bill that was signed in New York is that it's one of the first, if not the first, to include this expungement initiative. We're not legalizing cannabis without this happening. And they can't be separated. So I think more that needs to be implemented into from a policy perspective. So I think folks that do have charges who are from the legacy market can see, well, I am still being fought for. I'm still being advocated for. There is a space for me here, and folks are making a space for me here. So that's one thing. So from a policy perspective, and then like I mentioned, just on an industry perspective, the small things, like the terminology. How are we educating folks as to what terminology we're using and why? Why shouldn't we use the word weed anymore? We have to explain that, and we have to say this is the goal for some of those things. So I think language is a big part of it as well. And I think, because the industry is so new, there are a lot of folks who come in and I think want to put in all of this structure and make all these changes and say, hey, this is how we need to do things. And I think you have to, those conversations are not always as inclusive as they should be. And I think we have to look at okay, we are not just shaping this industry I'm just not looking at this for myself as a Spelman grad, as a as whatever I am. I'm not just trying to shape this industry for myself. I'm trying to shape this industry for everyone who has been harmed by it, everyone who can benefit from it, and everyone who should benefit from it. So we just need to have more of a global perspective, I think. And if we have that perspective, then that will come out in those conversations. And I think the folks that we are advocating for will start to feel more welcomed and like they have a place in the industry.
I really like the way you frame that. That makes a lot of sense.
Thank you.
A lot of sense. And as we transition into I Ain't Sorry, you mentioned that you've always been a cannabis advocate. What are some of the things that you've learned, either personally or professionally, that you feel like you take with you in your work?
One of the things is I have really put myself out there on Clubhouse when it comes to having some of these conversations. Sorry about that. And so a lot of folks reach out to me about advice, how to get in the cannabis industry, how to start businesses. And a lot of them are people of color. And so I have learned I mean, I've always known that the Black community has been very entrepreneurial minded.
Mm-hmm.
I just like it's the hunger that I see is just like I think there is this stereotype that Black people don't want to be entrepreneurs. I don't know. But just seeing the hunger that exists in our community to get into this industry that has harmed our communities has just completely blown my mind. And so that's not necessarily what I've learned. That's just something I appreciate. What I have learned, though, is that we need more programming for some of those folks, because I think on one hand, there's a lot of hunger, there's a lot of motivation. On the other hand, though, I think there is just a lack of resources, a lack of access to resources, a lack of exposure. You know, I don't have anyone in my family that's ever started a business. So I just had to really learn as I went. You know, I learned a lot from Spelman and like going to school. And so there are folks in our communities that don't have that. So I think we need incubators, we need accelerators, we need those types of programs for folks in our communities that want to become entrepreneurs, that want to get involved in this industry, but just don't know where to start. And so, you know, luckily, like I said, I have a lot of people that reach out to me. We get on sessions all the time and we just talk through whatever it is that they want to do. But there's not a lot of that. So like, for instance, in Detroit, we have, so there are these social equity programs, you know, per state, and the goal is to get more minority owners into the industry. And so Detroit has a program called the Legacy Program, where essentially a lot of the fees are reduced for longstanding Detroit residents. The number of licenses, because there's only a specific number of licenses, 50% of those are reserved for Detroiters. So there's a lot to get more Detroiters of color into the industry. However, there's not a lot after that. So like these folks get their licenses and then it's like, all right, cool, great job. And so we need programs. We need programs. And there are some folks in Detroit. I'm a part of an incubator, a woman whom I like adore. She's a Black cultivator. Not many of those. She started an incubator, a free incubator for Detroiters that my partner and I are speaking at. But there needs to be programs on a state level to say, hey, all of you folks that want to get involved in this industry, whether it be as an entrepreneur, whether it be as a bud tender, which is like a store clerk at a dispensary, whether it be whatever, a cultivator, come join this program. It'll be 8 weeks. And we will show you the ropes of how to make sure you have that foundation set. So, you know, that's something that I've always seen the benefit for, but just after having so many people reach out to me, I see like there is an alarming need for those types of programs. That was a super long-winded answer to your question.
No, I actually have a follow-up now that I hadn't considered before, which is, so it's one thing to talk about like having your own dispensary or having your own like legal mechanism. But the people who work in them, is there like a special certification process for that as well?
So it depends, not really.
Okay.
And it's tough to get into this industry because there aren't, like, if you want to go into policy, you go to college, get your political science degree. If you want to go into medicine, you get your pre-med degree, whatever. There's not really anything for the cannabis industry from that perspective. I think that's changing. There are some universities that are starting to introduce those types of tracks, but there are individual training companies who will offer tracks. Like say you want to be a bud tender in a dispensary, then you can, go through this training program, get certified. So there are those types of things. It just gives you an edge, like any certification. But in terms of something like standardized, not yet. But like I said, I do think that will be coming in the near future.
I think it will be coming in the near future as well, especially as people, like a friend of mine went to a dispensary. I want to say it was either in California or in Nevada, but she likened it to the Apple store, right? She's like, I'm going to come in, there's bright lights, there's like, like there's a personal assistant to me. He's like, oh, what type of experience are you looking for? I think they called them like experience curators.
Yep.
And like, so that person like walked her through that entire process. And she was like, it was easily the, she's like, I've been, purchasing for a long time, but it was a great experience. And so that's what I think will bring me back. And I was thinking like, in order to do that, it's similar to anything else where you would need to know the product, know different variations and what's required and like what would be good and not good together, all those types of things.
Exactly. Because I've had experiences like your friend where I've gone in and like, I'm like, oh, I feel fancy. Like, you know what I mean? It's just this whole experience. And then I've gone into other dispensaries where it's just like, okay, we're both struggling through this, you know, in terms of what products I should get. So there's no standardization. And, you know, dispensary managers are some of the most stressed out folks in this industry. Like there's so much that they have to manage. So sometimes there's just not time to train their staff. Unfortunately, they're having to manage so many things. So it makes sense, you know, at the same time though, like, you know, we do need some sort of standardization, like, you know.
I get how that could be very helpful because I do think that it is a guided process and it can be different experiences. And so you wouldn't want someone to have a different experience than what they were looking for, particularly in something that could be, I guess, viewed as fragile anyway. And like before we transition into Drunken Love, I did want to take a second to talk about something you and I mentioned earlier, which was the Biden-Harris administration not or allegedly dismissing a host of young staffers, even those who came from legal places where cannabis is legal, for previous cannabis usage. So this was not a situation where someone failed a drug test or was participating in the, I guess, participating actively. And how surprising that was because of both, I guess, Vice President Harris admitting while she was running that she has used in the past. And I thought about it the other day that like Joe Biden is probably old enough that he remembers when Coca-Cola had actual cocaine. Like the idea that like now here we are and you're, you know, in your 70s, I believe, and expelling people for cannabis just feels so outdated and so unnecessary, particularly in a place like DC where other people are using and it's not illegal.
Yes. Yeah. And like we were chatting about earlier, like not everybody was shocked by that. There were some folks that, you know, from the beginning said, no, this is too good to be true. This is not what it seems like. I was not one of those people. That shocked me. And like you said, it's very outdated. Like we're moving in the opposite direction. So to dismiss folks that have used in the past, not even current, even if it was current, I'd be like, okay, this is a bit much. But like in the past, it shocked me. And I think a lot of folks.
Yeah, I think for some people it felt like, I don't know. So I guess as far as my surprise level, now that I'm thinking about it, it does kind of track with some other decisions that have been made as far as like the student loan situation. I mean, he was never for like Medicare for all or some of the other more left policies, but there was this idea that the people on the campaign trail pitched themselves as significantly more progressive than the people in
yeah.
And so maybe I should be less surprised then because that's kind of how this has been. But it's also, it's frustrating because I don't think it's fair, particularly if it's going to be legal certain places and not legal other places, to punish people. I think it sends a disjointed response.
Yes.
So federal employees, I believe, have never been able to partake. And so there was that understanding. I know that because I live here, but other than that, I don't know why anybody would. But it's been so interesting to kind of watch this happen rapidly at the state level, even in some conservative places. So like Oklahoma, I believe, has legalized, at least in medicinal forms, along with some other places that I was like, oh, okay, but just not here. And to have that wild response is off-putting at best.
Yeah, even Mississippi, I believe they decriminalized. They haven't legalized it
too, but yeah, it was them.
So, like, cause that's kind of embarrassing. Like, no offense to, you know, with all due respect to Mississippi, like, come on now, like with that, yeah, it's backwards. To me, it's backwards, 100%.
Agreed. And as we transition into Drunken Love, I just kind of want to offer you some space to offer any final thoughts, Anything that you wish we had gotten a chance to touch on earlier that we didn't, all of those things I'm open and available for, and as are the listeners.
Yeah. So I would think there's still, I see a lot of intimidation for folks who want to get in the industry, but are still intimidated, whether it be because of the paranoia, whether it be the cost or what have you. And, or folks that think it's too late. You know, I've heard that quite a bit, like, oh, it's too late. And that is far from the truth. For one, it's not too late. Now is the perfect time. So New Mexico, they are working on legalizing as well. So they will be the 16th state if that goes through. So if you think about how many states we have in our nation, and we're at 16, that's not even half. So we are far from being too late. So if you want in this industry, now is the time, especially for people of color. Now is the time to get in this industry. There are services available. There are grants available. Don't know how long they will be available. I think the climate of everything that's happened, I've been watching the George Floyd trial for the past couple of days. Everything that has happened, those resources are available to minorities now. In 2 years, I don't know. So now is the time. Don't be intimidated. I'm available. I always make myself available to folks. You can reach out to me via Instagram, LinkedIn, whatever. Let's get on a call. I don't care, Zoom, whatever. I'm just so passionate about getting more women, minorities, veterans into this space. And if I can be an avenue or a tool in any capacity, that's what I want to do. And just, take the leap. Just find someone who is going to be willing to talk to you. And then you can take baby steps. You don't have to say, okay, well, I want to get into this industry. I need to do it within the next 60 days. Take your time, do it right, be compliant, and, come join us.
I appreciate you being here. And I did have a couple things that I thought of while we were having this conversation. One is that so much of our generation is kind of coming into our own as far as entrepreneurship and the relationship with capitalism in so many different avenues. And so I think this offers an opportunity for people who might not see a space for them other places. I know a lot of people tend to complain about their 9 to 5 or not feeling like they are appreciated or want to work in certain spaces. And so I think that this is an opportunity to do that. I also think that I completely agree with you that as it becomes more structured as an industry, take your time, do your research, talk to people who are involved, and go ahead and get in a way that works for you. I've seen friends of mine who have, I guess, like review blogs, right, where they talk about different flower they've encountered and the experience they had, right. I also know people who, I think our Spellman sister has a dispensary in Maryland, right. There's a host of ways that people have found a niche for themselves, and I think that it like anything else, as it like becomes an industry, like other things will also pop up. People will have a host of ways to be involved. And so I definitely think that if people are interested, then they should. My last point is that I earnestly believe that, like, within reason, Black folks should be everywhere. Like, so this idea that like anything is not for us, or there are blocks, barriers, whatever it is, like, we have a right to participate here. And so we can do whatever we want to do. And so in the event it appeals to you, I definitely think you should. But with that being said, Ms. Robinson, I have enjoyed you immensely. In the event that someone wants to reach out to you or follow up with you, what's the best way to do that?
Yeah, so you can reach out to me on Instagram. I'm super responsive to my DMs, at Cree.Robinson. Find me on LinkedIn, Cree Robinson, and then our website. So our software is called Toucanna. So it's a play on the bird toucan and the canna, cannabis. That's TOUCANNA.io. There's a contact us form, so you can reach out to me there. Like I said, I try to be super available for folks who want advice, tips, who want to just do a brainstorming session, whatever. Reach out to me, and I am here.
Okay, well, 1 second, if you don't mind, while I wrap up here. You just finished this episode of Unbossed, Unbothered, and Unfiltered. If you're looking for me, you can find me at Lauren Zayu on Twitter and Instagram. And if you're looking for the show, you can find us at Unbossed, Unbothered, and Unfiltered on Facebook and Instagram. I hope to see you there, and I'm glad you're listening. You just finished this episode of Unbossed, Unbothered, and Unfiltered. with host Lauren Zayu and music by Lighthouse Productions. If you want to learn more about the show, follow at Lauren Zayu on Twitter and Instagram. You can also find more episodes on Facebook and Instagram at Unbossed, Unbothered, and Unfiltered. Thanks for listening.